So last week we talked about regrets, and we went back to one of my favorite podcasts and revisited some of the advice that I have given about how to stay in the here and now, how to not let regrets drive our lives or run our lives, but influence maybe what we're doing in the here and now so that, moving forward, we don't build more regrets, for instance. This week, I am picking an old podcast to re-highlight some of what I've advised you to do using this principle I call the next right thing. And the next right thing is a principle from Alcoholics Anonymous is where I learned it from in codependency literature. It is this principle of living in this day, one day at a time, and using your body mind, using how you feel about what's going on in your life to do just the next right step towards feeling more in alignment with what you want. And that when you check in and you're trying to escape from your life all the time, you're trying to, hustle for your worthiness. You're busy all the time. Things don't feel right. You're meh. I mean, maybe life on paper looks good, but it doesn't feel right to you on the inside. Using the next right thing principle really can help you to get to where you want to go, to get into alignment with a life that you want to get up for every single day. And that, I think, is something I really want to drive home for women in midlife. LearnToLoveYourStory.com was really based on that premise. And when I created Midlife Crisis to a Centered Life Thriving as a podcast, I wanted another voice out there in the world helping you understand that if you're feeling stuck in any way, shape, or form in midlife, you don't have to stay there. That isn't the end of this. I know that when we were talking about things like perimenopause symptoms and you go into your doctor and they're like, me, that's hormones, you're just going to have to deal, that we get this message that if we feel stuck, if we feel like we regret things that we haven't yet done in our lives, that, hey, that's just what you're going to have to deal with is the only method. Acceptance is the only method. There is an element of acceptance in this do the next right thing principle. However, it still has a do in that statement. You're still doing something and you're working towards something that gets you out of that stuck place. So today's podcast is really highlighting this principle and why I think it is so pivotal to creating a life that you want to be living in. If this sounds like something interesting to you, keep listening. Welcome. This is Midlife Crisis to a Centered Life Thriving, a podcast that teaches women in midlife to unapologetically stop silencing their dreams and start designing the lives they want to live in. I'm your host, Dr. Natalie, and as a clinical psychologist of the last 2 decades and a twice divorced single mother myself, I not only know how hard it can feel heading into midlife, I am living it right here with you. I have taken all the many failed attempts and lessons learned in my own life and combine it with my extensive clinical experience to give you the tools you need to make midlife the best time in your life. No joke. So let's get started.
Are you on my mailing list yet? Because if you're not, you really should be. You want to join at learntoloveyourstory.com. If you scroll down, I'm giving away a freebie for you. Honestly, you know what it is? A free course. I sell online courses, but this is a course just for you, and it's about freeing yourself, letting go of what others' expectations and ideas are for you. You know, that nagging self-doubt in your head, it's usually fueled by your consideration of what others think of you over your consideration of what you think of you. And so I teach you in my video all about what is underlying that kind of self-doubt and how to get out of that conundrum. And I give you a workbook that goes with it that helps you to build the skill sets that you're going to need for that. So please make sure you're on my mailing list, because at the least, you're going to get a free gift. And at the most, you're going to hear about all the things that we're doing on Midlife Crisis to a Centered Life Thriving and learntoloveyourstory.com. And you don't want to be missing out on any of the new things that'll be coming your way.
Welcome back to Midlife Crisis to a Centered Life Thriving and learntoloveyourstory.com. I am here today to bring us back to the past yet again, looking at some of my old podcasts. I mean, I've only been doing this for 2 seasons, but one of my earlier podcasts and revisiting some of the principles that I really want to keep reminding you of. These are skills that you can start employing today that really start to work on helping us get into that life that we want to be living a life that we love and loving the life that we're in right this minute. I know it seems crazy. It seems crazy that that could even be a thing. It's so true, though. I promise you it is so true. And this next right thing principle has really been a way that I've taught that to clients sitting across the couch for me. It's how I've talked about it here on the podcast, written it in blogs, all of those things. And I did, try and go through some of my older podcasts to find one that really honed in on this. And this podcast, which was podcast 21 from the first season, really did highlight how I had used it for myself during my journey of deciding to do learntoloveyourstory.com. I really think that that journey is something that's worth sharing yet again as an example of how I used this principle and teaching you this principle all through this podcast today. So please enjoy. And when you're done listening, we'll come back and meet again and talk a little bit about what you heard. But I think that one of the things sitting across the couch from people for thousands of hours that I've really figured out is that there is this moment when we finally recognize, while we want all of these things, we're not likely going to be able to have all these things. And it isn't for a lack of dreaming, and it isn't for a lack of competence or wanting any of those things. It really is just about there's a finite resource here. And that resource is you. And she is not going to be able to do all the things. She can do many, many, many things, but she won't be able to accomplish all the things. So what do you want her to accomplish, right? And I know that peppered throughout this whole month, I've also been talking about how we're always up against this lack of knowledge of what it is that we want, because we've been so socially conditioned to know what it is that everybody else wants from us or of us or with us or whatever. But it isn't a skill set yet that we've been taught to really dial into what it is that we want. Where does our heart take us? I would even say that a lot of us have been culturally conditioned to not listen to that, to second guess what it is that I want. What are the things that I know that my heart would guide me towards, but that your heart might not guide you towards? I think that we're socially conditioned basically to deny what it is that is the best thing for us. We've been socially conditioned rather to be really great human givers. It's that human giver syndrome idea that I've talked about before from Dr. Emily and Dr. Amelia Nagoski's book on burnout, all about, women were human givers. We've been given this edict and we follow through with it. We're the good little girl. We're the good big girl. We're the dutiful wives and mothers. We're the, best person to be on your team at work because we're loyal and we follow through. I mean, there's a lot of great qualities that have come from that. But one of the drawbacks is that we've been given this great superpower of understanding what others' needs are, but we haven't been nurturing our knowledge of ourselves and our knowledge of what we need. And that's really one of these missing pieces, I think, that it just shows up. At this point in talking about living our big dreams, I would be amiss if I wasn't going to go after why we want to do this. And I am willing to bet, ladies, that one of the biggest barriers is yourself. I wish it wasn't. It so is. And I know for sure it's been something that's been a bit of an evolution in my own life. So I'll share a little bit about my own story here. I mean, I have talked a little bit off and on in the podcast that Learn to Love Your Story has been a little passion project of mine. Started, around the beginning of COVID. And honestly, I didn't know where I was going with this when I first started. I had no idea. But I was using many of the principles that I've been teaching this month, following that kind of that's the next right thing principle that I talk about in my online courses. It's this idea of I have a dream. I kind of know what it should look like on the other side, but you know what it is? I don't really know what it's going to look like. I know how I'm going to feel when I'm there. And that's what I really anchor back to most of the time is this idea of when I've accomplished educating women and have enough platforms where I feel satisfied that women are getting this information in a way that they need it and can access it and can use it, I am going to feel like $1,000,000. And it certainly has guided every next right step of this process because I'll feel like, oh yeah, I did this thing. I put these online courses out there. And then when I realized that people aren't accessing those, like it wasn't that I didn't make the information, but how do I get it out there? Well, then I started looking at marketing stuff. And after I did that, it was like, oh my gosh, people need like whole groups of other women that are doing this with them because that really lifts them up. So then I added group coaching. There was like this whole process of adding the next right thing as I was bringing this to fruition. But what has told me that I'm on the right track has always been my gut, has always been me going back in and checking in with myself and asking myself, does this feel right? Is this what I've been trying to accomplish? Is this what I want women to have? Is it enough? Do I feel like I've saturated what I can do here? Or is there more that I could be doing? So the information I'm teaching, very similar. I mean, if you've listened to my podcast, you've heard that. If you've read my blogs, you've read that. If you've been in my group coaching, you've heard that. Please access all of those different ways of getting this information. Make sure that I'm meeting your needs by meeting you where you're at. Some of us like to read. Some of us like to pop this podcast on as we're driving to and from work or commuting, to pick up and drop off kids or whatever else that we do in our lives. And I want to make sure that you get this information. The information I've already known, I've known it for a long time. And so my next right thing principle has really been about guiding me about how do I feel like it's landing? Am I doing enough? And then doing the next right step of that right in front of me. And I learned this, of course, through the hard knocks of life, because that's just really where this information comes from. And I started to teach about it after I had learned it in my hard knocks. And I have learned it and I've relearned it multiple times in the hard knocks of my life. And, in the middle of those liminal spaces where you're not meeting the needs of the social, cultural programming and conditioning, you're really like faced with this idea of, is this my dream? Is this really my dream or was this somebody else's dream for me? And I think that in both occasions, when I've gone through both of those, when I've, had to move and relocate with my kid and, start over financially, I've learned that oftentimes if I'm in my head about where I should be, I get caught up in the programming and conditioning, and I don't make the best decisions for myself as far as how to come out the other side of that. If I'm all caught in my head about what it looks like, do I look like what I'm supposed to be doing? Does it look like to other people what I'm supposed to be doing? I get stuck, right? I think I can do it all, and I want to do it all, and I'm forcing myself like with this shoehorn to fit into something that I don't fit into. I'm looking to look good, not feel good. And so it was in these moments, these liminal spaces, that I really started to learn how to check in with myself. Like, does this feel right? And I can tell you that this most recent iteration of this, so my second divorce, moving into the place with my little one, my son deciding he wanted to go live with his dad, it was a new configuration. And so I was looking at a new, smaller place and things like that. I was a good year after that. And I, had been doing overworking. I've talked about that in blogs and things too. I'd been doing a lot of overworking as my favorite choice of numbing agent. Not an alcoholic. I don't overshop. Those aren't things that I do, but I love to overwork. So that's how I was choosing to numb myself out during my divorce and all the pain and things that go with that adjustment. But it was about a year after I was starting to settle in, and I really recognized like this didn't feel right. And I had honed that skill over time, like how to check in with yourself. And again, these are all things that I teach in my online courses. So self-awareness, compassionate self-awareness, I'm using all of that. I'm looking at like, am I making the right self-empowered decision here? I don't think I am. So I was sitting here like a year out from that, maybe a little bit more, in a better place after I'd paid back a lot of that stuff. And I was saying to myself, this still doesn't feel right to me. Like, I don't feel like I'm in alignment with this dream that I have for myself. I'm not sure why. So I'm going to stay curious about that. But I know that the working thing isn't going to work for me. Like, it helped me to pay off these debts. I've gotten myself kind of in a better space now. I'm good about that. I'm happy with that. But I still wasn't feeling in alignment. And I really didn't know what it was that I was supposed to be working towards. And here is where I think that many of us find ourselves. Like, we know that we could do anything, but we are realizing we can't do everything. And we're figuring out for ourselves that the thing that we've decided to line ourselves up with is not the thing. That's a hard place to be, my friends. Like, one of my specialities in therapy when I do clinical therapy with clients is grief therapy work. And grief is a huge thing. It's much bigger than I think what we've been kind of acculturated to believe it is. Like, it's the loss of people, and then you grieve that, and there's stages, and you're done, right, Dr. Natalie? Nope. I could do an entire series, and maybe will someday, on the grief whole subject matter. But I can tell you that that's what you're up against when you recognize A, I can't do everything, and B, I think the thing that I saddled myself to is not my thing. And that feels kind of gross because, oh my gosh, I can't do everything because I don't have all the time. And you're telling me that I just saddled myself doing a thing I don't want to be doing? Does anybody hear me here? I bet you've been here. I've met many people who have been here, and it's a hard place to be. You're like, what you're saying to me right now, Dr. Natalie, is I have done the wrong thing this whole time, that I saddled myself with the wrong goal, that I've come to the end of something. Maybe I've even killed it. Like, I am really good at what I'm doing here, and it isn't my thing. That's what you're trying to tell me? Yeah, that's what I'm trying to tell you. And it's a hard place to be. You can feel really yucky about that. And there's a lot of grieving that you need to do when you have to just finally draw a line in the sand and say, yeah, this isn't going to work for me. This is not the life that I want for myself. I'm going to have to start over almost down a whole different path. But the way that we figure that out is when it doesn't feel right. When we've been in our heads and attaching ourselves with what we think it should look like, what other people have told us it should look like, but we arrive kind of, or we're at the place where we should be kind of taking an assessment saying, hey, is this working out? Does this feel good? We realize, it feels meh. For some of us, it doesn't feel terrible. We're doing things well, but it doesn't feel like it's for us. Once you've got some really good skill sets with being able to check in with yourself, and you've made it a point to actually do that checking in, you're going to start to find an answer that you don't always like, which is, yeah, this isn't for you. So, that whole journey of being married and having a big family and a huge house and entertaining and all those ideas that you had for yourself, Natalie, yeah, that isn't your life. and each time you went to the altar of trying to make that happen, fantastically, sometimes, my friends, that shit blew up in my face. So I know now that's not for me. But even when I course adjusted and I came into this place and I had my wits about me and I was thinking about this a little bit differently, once I got stable again, I realized, this is not working for me. I would say even a year ago today, I still had not completely grasped where it was that I needed to be going. But last year, I took some time off and I did some things right. And I set out a plan for myself that was way more attached to the way I would feel. So I was going to need to reduce hours with my clinical practice because I needed to feel differently. I was headed down a burnout place because I was working at a pace that was just beyond what I needed to be working at post COVID. I mean, COVID was hard on all of us. It's still, actually, there's a lot of residual effect from it that's still hard on a lot of us. And I put in my dues as a mental health professional with lots of my clients through that. And I'm at a place right now where I get to choose differently and they get to choose differently. We're going to be able to help them out, right? So last year when I sat down and did that assessment of myself, that was part of my consideration, is just, I don't feel in it like I was when I started this practice. And so I need to modify that practice, which means reducing a lot of the hours I put towards the practice, because I think there's other ways and other skill sets I need to tap into, like my writing, like the podcast, like speaking, basically, because I can articulate some of this stuff in ways that people understand it. It's a gift I was given. I'm not going to pretend like it isn't a gift that I put a ton of effort behind being able to do, but it is something that I do well, and it is something that's needed. And so I needed to course adjust and fix how I was doing that. And this, what I'm doing right now today, right in front of you, feels more in alignment. I can feel it, that I'm in a path that's better aligned with where I need to be. So doesn't mean what I've done or what I was hitched to was something that I shouldn't have been hitched to when I was hitched to it. It just means that there was a shelf life to that. And that's where I was hitting. I was hitting that point where it felt meh, didn't feel right. I might have even been heading towards burnout, and I needed to course adjust to be able to bring this back to a place that worked better for me. So again, it all comes back to this idea of, I can do all that. I could have stayed on that path with my clinical practice. I still have a clinical practice, my friends. I just don't have it to the level that I once did. And I knew I could do that, but I can't do everything. And when I reassessed, I realized there's some other things that needed attention from me and that I needed to try. I needed to give a go at that. If I hadn't taken those risky steps of, setting aside hours towards, even though they weren't bringing in money for me, but making sure that you had this podcast in front of you, making sure that I had more blogs, making sure that I started my book, all of those things feel right for me as far as my goals and my dreams. And I needed to take those risks, and I wasn't going to do that if I was trying to do everything. If I was trying to feed my old style of business, the old configuration of my business, and do these things, there just weren't enough hours in the day. And I was going to have to take a look at that, redo things. And I'm hoping this has inspired you in some way to take a look at and redo things in your life. It doesn't have to be a grieving process that's like, burn it all and run away and start over. That's not what it looked like for me. I mean, in a lot of ways, it was a stepwise process that took more than a year to put some of this stuff into action for me. But on my Learn to Love Your Story journey, it's been really important for me to stay true to checking in and making sure that what I'm doing feels right. Like it feels like it's part of whatever this goal is that I have for myself. Sometimes I can see it. Sometimes I can say the step today is a step that's part of this whole journey of steps that will get to this end dream for me that will look a certain way. Sometimes it does look like that, or it feels and looks like that. But sometimes the better way to check in is really just, how does it feel? Does it feel like it's part of that? Because if in any way it feels meh, or like it's killing you, or like, if I have to do another one of these things, I'm just going to die. I can't put my energy towards that anymore, but I don't know how to get out of it. Well, there you are. You need to set some new dreams for yourself, and the dreams and the things you're doing towards those dreams need to feel anchored in a way that's in alignment with that new place. I know you might not have all the answers of how do I do this and not pay my bills? How do I do this and not blah, blah, blah? You have a lot of reasons why you shouldn't be doing it. But I do know that if it doesn't feel right, you are serving the wrong thing. So one of my very favorite ways of teaching this in my coaching in any place, so here I am teaching it to you on the podcast, is to use this old Cherokee legend. And so many of you might have heard this. It's kind of a parable, a Cherokee parable or story that talks to this idea of mindfulness and how we use this in our daily life. But I'm going to share it with you here. I'll put a link in the notes as well, because I think that it's a really great way for us to just envision this and know what I am trying to teach you here about, like checking in with your feeling and making sure that you're aligning yourself with the very things that are in alignment with your end goal dream. And that's this Cherokee parable. So I'll share it with you here. An old grandfather is speaking to his grandson about what causes the violence and cruelty in the world. In each human heart, he tells the boy, there are two wolves battling one another. One is fearful and angry, and the other is understanding and kind. The young boy then asks, which one will win? His grandfather smiles and says, whichever one we choose to feed. And that's how I want you to think about it in this two wolves parable idea, that when we feed a dream that isn't ours, but one that's been set for us, it really can lead to a lot of our angst, to a lot of the problems that we experience along the way, and certainly to feeling dissatisfied, meh, stuck, any of those different adjectives when we really are like we've arrived, we've been able to meet that goal, but we're just not feeling satisfied, joyful, happy, content in our lives. There is a way for you to have the resources you need to find that life that you've always wanted for yourself. And this is a way to do it. And this two wolves parable is just a way for you to frame it for yourself when you're checking in with that feeling. Am I feeding the wolf that's bringing me angst and destruction and pain and dissatisfaction and feeling stuck? Or am I feeling that kind and understanding part of me that knows that the next right step is this, in alignment with a dream that I want for myself? Even if it feels risky, even if feeding it feels a little risky. This is why I like it that it's two wolves. This is not two bunnies. Like sometimes it feels a little risky to feed any wolf whatsoever, but I do want you to feed this wolf that is here for you. She is going to be the one that guides you. Here's the other thing I like about the wolf analogy. When a leading wolf is leading, it's at the back of the pack. It's actually the wolf at the back of the pack that's watching the vulnerable parts of our pack, that's watching that the pack is going in the right direction and is guiding from that behind position. Now, I am certainly not a zoologist and cannot tell you all of the pieces that go into who's in what places in the pack, because I know that it's bookended and there is another leadership position at the front. But there is a part of that pack that one of the stronger animals is in the back, and they are guiding this pack and the children and the elderly and all the ones that are a little bit more vulnerable, like mothers that are carrying children, things of that nature. They want to have somebody in the back end. And I think that's how this will feel. You won't always know where you're going. You don't always have like this solid picture of what step 1, 2, 3 through 20 is going to be. But you do have a feeling of, am I in the right place at the right time? You do have the ways of checking in your body, mind, and knowing that you're in alignment with something that you want for yourself. Because if you're not in alignment with it, it won't feel right. And if you're listening to your gut, it will be able to guide you with that. And that's what this two wolves parable can help you with as well. So all of that will be in the notes along with my workbook. Make sure that you've listened to all of this series, because it really has been a whole set of skills that you could manifest any dream with. I promise you, I've laid it all out for you. The science backs all of it. I don't teach things that don't have scientific efficacy. You know that about me. I'm a nerd. All right, everybody. So, what did you learn from that, right? I mean, I think one of the things that I want to highlight here is that I was really in a place in time where things were going relatively well after kind of the thick of a disruption in my life, right? So this wasn't in the midst of the midlife crisis that never was, or almost was, or maybe it was. I don't know. It was actually when I had righted myself that I clearly started to notice, something here is still amiss. Something doesn't feel in alignment for me. And I started to guide myself with the next right thing principle by checking in with how I was feeling. This is why I hammer home the skills of compassionate self-awareness, because without compassionate self-awareness, you might blow past that. You might not notice it. And it's subtle, right? I think it's subtle for many women in midlife. You get to midlife and there's a stuckness to it, but there's also a familiarity with where you're at. And you'd rather stick with the familiar than try something that feels very uncomfortable, which is new and change and not what you want to do, right? So I want you to really hear that piece of this, that for many of us, we're not in a bad spot in our midlife. We're in a meh spot. We're in a blah spot. Maybe we think we're in a stuck spot, but we're not so stuck that we wouldn't just stay here because staying here feels familiar. So we'd rather just do that instead of doing something, change just feels like too much for us. Here's why I love the next right thing principle. That's not a huge change. It's asking you to just do the next thing right in front of you. And that's all you're responsible for. It doesn't have some end goal in mind that looks a certain way. Remember, I kind of talked about in that podcast, you might not know how your future is going to look at all. You might not know what the steps are several feet down the road, several years down the road. You only know that what you're feeling feels and you need to do one thing towards not feeling And that's the beauty of this, is that it doesn't really threaten the familiarity part. You're going to keep most everything in your life the same. You're only going to do the next right thing, not all the things, just the next right thing. And it doesn't have to be some huge thing. It can be something quite small. If you want to add more fiber to your diet, you don't have to jump in and have 20 vegetables that you get at the grocery store that mold in your fridge because you're never going to eat them all in the week anyway. You might just add salad for the week, right? That might be the next right thing. So this is kind of why I love this principle, is it's not going to be a moving and shaking type of step. It's just one little thing right now until your body mind says again, but this still isn't enough. So then what's the next right thing? Well, this isn't enough. What's the next right thing? And that will take as long or short as you need it to. Your body mind will walk you through that. No change is happening so significantly all at once that you have to, reckon with it and give up your familiarity. You can hold on to the familiarity a bit as you're kind of pushing that growth edge and doing the next right thing, one thing at a time. I promise you that it's in that magic of being in the life that you're in, that kind of trying to step into the life of your future, that you will find that centered life thriving. Because I am a licensed clinical psychologist in the state of Minnesota, I have to make sure at the end of each of these episodes that I give you the disclaimer that none of the material that I talk about in these podcasts is meant to replace any kind of therapy or formal medical or mental health treatment. And in fact, anything that I offer on my website, my coaching programs, any kind of psychoeducational materials that I release are not a replacement for that level of care. So just take that into account when you listen. This is information for you, and hopefully you find it of value, both as an educational tool and for your entertainment. And I also want to mention that if anyone you know is in a mental health crisis, needs additional help, I always include these 2 crisis resources. They're available to anybody. Pick up the phone and dial 988 for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And you can always visit their website at suicidepreventionlifeline.org. Additionally, there's actually a crisis text line. So if you're not somebody that likes to pick up the phone, text HOME, home, to 741-741 to the crisis text line. And you can find them online at crisistextline.org. Thank you for listening to my podcast, and I hope that you like and follow me wherever you get your podcasts, and maybe consider leaving me a review. It always helps me to keep this podcast relevant when I know what you want to hear about.